My guest this week is actor, author, and comedian DC PIERSON. As an actor, he's appeared in movies like Captain America, The Winter Soldier, and shows like Community and Key and Peele. His novel, The Boy Who Couldn't Sleep and Never Had to, won the American Library Association's Alex Award, and his young adult novel, Crap Kingdom, was a Junior Library Guild selection. He was a member of the sketch comedy group Derrick, whose videos have been viewed over 1 billion times. And the best way to keep up with him these days is by subscribing to his frequently funny, rarely annoying newsletter at dcpearson.com/newsletter. And it is my great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, DC PIERSON. Hi, DC.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, me too. You picked a meaty one. It's like one of those ones that people just assume is just going to be taken off the pile.
Kind of what I assumed.
Yeah, this is Spinal Tap. You know, there's some big ones, Gimme Shelter, Woodstock, Decline of Western Civilization 2, and then you have Spinal Tap, which is just in everyone's DNA,
Yes.
But before we get into the film, I wanted to ask, with Derrick and doing all the sketches, you did a lot of sketches about music.
Yes.
You were like doing sketches about hip hop and jazz and boy bands, emo, and you even did I think a Fraggle Rock parody theme, like an alternate theme, long time
you're
ago.
Going so deep. Yeah, absolutely. I'd be surprised if that one was still up just because of copyright and everything. But yeah, no, absolutely.
Did any of you come from music? Anyone in your group?
No, I mean, at the time, no. One of us has gone on to be an incredibly successful recording and touring artist in their own right, as
That's
Donald
Dominic,
Glover.
right?
Dominic Durkis. Yeah, exactly. He has a little folk group. They get together. They just do a lot of standards. I know Donald Glover, obviously, who is Childish Gambino. But at the time, none of us really were actively doing music, whatever. Although while we were doing the group, Donald started doing Childish Gambino stuff and things like that, in his dorm room. Right. And I always remember thinking it was really cool because we were at NYU and we were in the Weinstein dorm, or he was anyways. That's where he was doing a lot of the stuff. And just thinking how cool it was because it was that's where famously Def Jam started. Rick Rubin lived at Weinstein, and just thinking oh, this is really cool. And then knowing now since then where Childish Gambino has gone, it's sort of that's really neat.
I didn't even put that together.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Yeah, he was doing all the early 7 inches and 12 inches from his dorm room with LL Cool J and stuff like that. Incredible.
Yeah, Rick Rubin had LL Cool J. Donald had me on a couple of probably ill-conceived guest verses. So we work with what we have. But it's a poor carpenter that blames his tools. So obviously he made it work. Either way, it worked out for him.
Is music a pretty easy thing to skewer? Why is music such a target for comedy?
I think because it's such a cliche, the thing of all music, comedians want to be rock stars and rock stars want to be musicians kind of a thing. But I think that there is truth in that. And also, if you love anything you love is easy to parody. It is also a little bit of a cliche, but it's true. It's harder to parody stuff that you don't like because it just comes across as mean. And I think parody thrives in the specifics, and it's just harder to learn the specifics of things that you don't like because you don't want to be around them. Whereas when you watch Spinal Tap, for example, it's all of the ambiance and all of the sort of behind the scenes stuff of Rock Doc's past and just interviews. And you can tell these guys are just, if not literally hair metal, I don't know if they were fans specifically of that genre. And I would love to talk more about that and how it sort of feels they're well, we would have liked to make a Beatles thing, or I guess there was the Ruddles and stuff like that. But it feels a lot of, they're just steeped in behind the scenes music stuff and loving that stuff. And so everything is so fleshed out. It's so well directed, all of the different archival footage, you can just tell. And watching it, I'm oh yeah, this is what I love about sketch or comedy or parody. When we use the word parody, we think of somebody, wearing a, with a rubber chicken bow and arrow thing stuck through their head. But I think parody really comes down to loving the details and wanting to lovingly recreate them and then exaggerate the things that are inherently funny about the thing that you're parodying.
Yeah, they pretty much in an interview said they didn't want to do a Ruddles type thing where it was exactly who they're parodying. And hard rock, there's just such a long history with British metal and, again, dinosaur rock and the up and comers, Van Halen at the time, and the speed metal and things that were coming in. It was kind of a smart lane for them to gravitate to. And also, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you about being in a comedy group, because, being in bands my whole life, the decision making in a song by committee is really odd, because it is a lot improvisational a lot of times if you're writing something collectively. And then you have other people who are like, no, this is exactly how I want you to play this bass run or this keyboard or this drum part. How do you do something like sketch through committee? Is that similar? Is that a painful experience? Or I'm sorry I asked if it was painful.
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, no is the short, no is the headline there.
I don't know why I chose that word. I'm projecting.
Well, no, but I think that makes sense, because also, like, I've worked in different sort of permutations of a sketch group, and there's different ways that a sketch group can work. How Derrick ended up working, especially by the end, was sort of like everybody was really bought in on the sketches, sort of like from very early on, where it would sort of, especially early on, it was like stuff that we'd done in college that kept sort of like sketches that were still like knocking around. And then as the group went on, it would be like, oh, we're making a video, and while we're making the video, or we're on the drive up to New Hampshire, because we filmed a bunch of stuff in New Hampshire because it was easier to get locations there, because 2 members of the group were from there, than it was in like New York, where everybody wants to charge you for locations. It would be like, we're just like, doing bits like comedians do in cars, like friends do in cars, like bands do in cars, and making each other laugh. And then eventually it would just be like, oh, there's a weird non sequitur that develops into, something that becomes large. Somebody goes, oh, that bit that we kind of keep doing or coming back to, I know a way that could potentially be fleshed out into a sketch. And so then somebody would usually take that away and script it and bring it back to the group. And it would be like, okay, maybe other people are punching it up or whatever. And then we're making it. And in a few cases in shooting them, there would be room for improvisation. And then in other cases, it would be like, no, we're pretty much just like shooting the script. So it was a very I would say it was an extremely non-painful process, because you had buy-in from everybody. Like, it was very rare. I can't think of an example of somebody coming in and saying like, no, we got to do my thing, man. Like that. I've been in collaborations and sketch groups and stuff where it is more like that. And I think that is more the norm. But what was nice about this is it was like, okay, all 5 people in the group, was myself, Dominic, Donald, and then Dan, who directed the video sketches, and then Meggie, who produced them. Everybody, all 5 members, are all bought in on like what's funny about them at every step of the way. So it was rare that it would be like, very few cases of somebody being like, I'm not fully, like, I'm fully in on this thing that we're actually making.
It's weird. I always wonder why musicians think they're hilarious. Everyone just thinks that they can just hold court, with a mic in front of them. And some people are amazing at it, but it is funny to just, I've seen shows where you're like, wow,
right, you
need to knock this off.
Yes.
It's a weird deficiency we have. What we think we can do it all.
Yeah. Who's the funniest person you've been in a band with?
Robert Pollard from Guided by Voices.
That would have been my guess. But
I mean, he put out 2 albums of banter, like the Elvis record, where they took all the music out and it's just him talking in between. You think it's funny because you're already drinking the Kool-Aid of his artistry.
Right.
So it is a bit of that, like, oh, like I could not play this to my wife or child or anyone I know that's not a fan, and they'd be like, this is the thing. Right. I love it. Yes. Can I borrow this? Can you tape it for me? But I guess in terms of the mountain of people being funny on stage, he could hold court, and he would go off 15, 20 minutes often, and already a 3-hour show that had 2-minute songs.
Right.
And you could just see in some shows people looking at us like, you're going to play, right?
Right.
So I don't know. Who's the funniest person? Who's the funniest musician you've seen?
That's a great question. I remember I saw either last or second to last show by Harvey Danger, the lead singer of and songwriter of which Sean Nelson I've since become like buddies with. And there was it was a show at Largo. I had just moved to LA, and it was very much billed as like, this is like their farewell tour. They're like hanging it up. And I remember not so much in the show itself, it was in like the main room at Largo, but Sean did like a little afterwards. He was just going to like play piano in the side bar. And that was really cool too. And at one point, he kind of was noodling around and he was like, so I heard our big song today in Walgreens. He kind of noodles a little bit more. And then he turns to the audience and is like, which is just so rewarding, you know? And there is just something so wonderfully, perfectly like Sean and like sarcastic and biting and knowing and all of those things about, you know, and I don't know if you would have exactly the same reaction in that moment, but something about the night of them going like, we're doing this farewell tour.
Yes.
They had a song at the time where literally the chorus was the show must not go on, you know, like that was so where they were at. And just, he was somebody where it's like, you do want to hear him talk as well as sing because he is as sort of like funny and wry and also self-deprecating as he is on the records. So I think like definitely he's one that leaps to mind. But I think also to your point, when you're really bought in on somebody, especially if they have some sort of mystique that they're like puncturing a little bit with their like stage banter, I think that helps. Yeah. Whereas if somebody really needs your approval, if it's like an opening band and they have banter, you're just like, fucking play. Like, we don't know, nobody knows who you are. You know, I do think there is a lot of like you're saying about the audience's relationship to the artist who is attempting to be funny from the stage.
And I feel like it's rare that I go to a show and there's not banter. I feel like it is part of just the rock show these days.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I don't feel like in the 80s when I went to see Husker Du, it was like Bob Mould's just cracking jokes, you know, between him and Grant Hart.
Right.
This is kind of a funny question, but I've always wondered, what audience is more forgiving, a sketch comedy audience or an improv audience?
They're usually pretty similar because they're dorks. They're all dorks. And I say that like they know that I'm them. I am them also too. I have seen more sketch and improv, I think, than like a lot of people. Because also I used to like not only do stuff at the old UCB theater in New York in Chelsea that is now literally like having its like paved paradise and put up a parking lot moment. It's going to become like condos, and where UCB was, I think, is literally going to be like, you know, the boiler room or just like parking for
history gone.
Yeah. But so I also like bartended there and was a tech person there for a long time, like all these different things. And so it's like, I've seen so much sketch, I've seen so much improv. So when I say they're dorks, what I mean is it's people that want to do it. And in many cases often do it and are in the scene as well. And I think there's just a, like, it's not exactly like stand-up where stand-ups, this is a wild generalization, but depending on the scene, especially, stand-ups, I think there's a little bit more standoffishness where it's like a stand-up performing for a crowd of other stand-ups is often, I think, like to wildly generalize, that's a tough room. Like the other comics are going to give you nothing. Whereas like improv or sketch, again, I'm wildly generalizing here, but it's a lot of your fellow improvisers and sketch comedians who are somewhere on the same trajectory that you are. And especially in improv, what I would notice a lot, and other people have pointed this out, is like when you would do an improv show, the audience for which was a lot of like other improv students, they're going to laugh at things that aren't necessarily hilarious, that are just correct by sort of like improv ideology, because they're literally, they're laughing. They paid to find what you're doing funny. You know what I mean? Like they're paying to be like, I understand that that's a clever reuse of what you did in the first beat. And that's so like, it might not be the funniest thing in the world, but they're going to be like, ah, ha, 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 ha. And I'm saying this again from my own, I'm the person that I'm describing. So I would say both sketch and improv audiences, in my experience, are very nice and just fun and adventurous and playful and forgiving, as, again, wildly generalizing as compared to your average like stand-up audience.
Well, I'm going to cut out all the wildly generalizing
Please, yeah,
and
exactly.
put in fact.
Fact, exactly.
I'm just going to like sample that in and then
Thanks,
put
Chris.
it up on every
exactly.
stand-up
Every
comedy
comedy blog,
comics, Twitter account.
Leave it on every Jesse David Fox Vulture article. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
The truth is out.
Yes.
Well, what's interesting about the Spinal Tap movie and how it came to be is most of these people went to college together. Some of the ideas, came about as early as the Lenny and the Squigtone record. Nigel Tufnell, that's where he made his first appearance, and he even made an appearance on American Bandstand when Lenny and the Squigtones played. Laverne and Shirley knockoff record, novelty record.
Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, that's so cool.
And so he was introduced as Nigel Tufnell, which I guess Christopher Guest got from being in the lobby of the Chateau Marmont. Is how you say it?
Sure.
I don't know. I don't want to be canceled either.
Right. By like French people? What's the concern there?
No, I don't know. Just, LA people.
Cokeheads? By cokeheads. You don't want to be canceled by cokeheads?
Exactly. Okay. Cokeheads. But he was in the lobby and he heard this conversation going on that was so Spinal Tap of basically a manager checking in a rock band, a British rock band. And the manager was like, "Where's your bass?" And he's like, "What? Your bass, where is it?" "It's at the airport." "Why is it at the airport?" "What? Your bass. Why is it?" And it just went on. And he's like, and he just said it was remarkable and it just kind of stuck in him.
Yeah.
And, I think between that and have you heard the Trogs recording where they're fighting in the studio?
No.
It's pretty amazing. It's pretty available online. I'll put that in the show notes too.
Oh, yeah. I gotta check that out.
They're just yelling at each other and just calling each other the worst names. And they'll be recording and someone will be like, yes, 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 no, 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 like you're doing it wrong.
Right.
And they're just being so cruel. And they said those two things were really big in terms of them just getting together and just falling into these voices and just kind of playing off each other. They tried to get some funding for the film and they were able to raise $10,000 of their own money to make a 20-minute short version of the film. And some of it ended up in the film, like the Listen to the Flower People, and some of that stuff was shot for this because it was like a condensed history of Spinal Tap. And they had people like Nina Blackwood from MTV, who was a VJ, was in it, but they couldn't find anyone to understand what they were wanting to do. And it wasn't till Norman Lear basically said, "I trust you guys, just, make the thing."
Yeah.
And again, they made it and people were really confused. I remember being in high school when this came out and people going to the theater and not realizing it was a joke.
Love that.
When it first came out on videotape even, it had a disclaimer at the end. This is not a real band. This is a fictional band. It was done so well that if you didn't know, I could imagine you just being like, wow, they captured the falling apart of this band. But it just seems incredible that they kept having to be like, no, it's fake. It's fake.
That's so great. I was wondering about that when it was, like when you had the Marty DeBerge, opening spiel, and then it kicked into the title sequence. I was really wondering and thinking about like how well it's done in terms of the sort of like, rock and roll parking lot style or heavy metal parking lot style interviews with people. Yes. And then you're sort of like, I was just thinking like, oh, if I sat down and showed this to somebody now who just, had not heard of it, which is probably most people below a certain age, they would just assume that it was real, and how wonderful that is because it's played so straight. And I love that.
It is.
And it is something that I don't know what we do about it, but it seems like because of the way the internet has worked for a while, but works more and more every day. Everybody just brings whatever they just assume that everything that they're looking at is like, I don't know, real or like, it's just so hard if you don't come right out and say like, this is a joke. This is so obviously a joke. And some of that is just like context, like things will be presented to you out of context and everybody's walking around online mad all the time, which is like somewhat understandable. The world is horrible, but it is so wonderful when you see something that does not really like wink at all, even though obviously it's like gigantic and huge and over the top in certain
Yes.
parts, but it never sort of breaks. And I love that about it. And it would so lose something if that were not the case.
Yeah, they really pushed back against Embassy Picture, really wanted to do like airplane style trailers. They wanted more stuff inserted like that. That was like goofball, like, oh, this is a parody of metal. Like it's just not based in reality. I think they did a really smart choice. You're right with the title sequence. They hired documentary filmmakers to shoot it, which was really smart. So people who knew what the focus was on stage and how to work around somebody playing guitar and shooting the audience, they knew when to capture things and what to focus on. And that's so smart, rather than like we're making a studio comedy picture about music, because most comedy films about music are not super funny. They're often miss the mark in terms of their believability. They're so heightened. The comedy is so just like goofy and parody based that for something that's 90 minutes, it tends to wear the viewer out. Where this, like you said, the people who they're talking to are like, tap, and they're like that woman who's just standing there, train of thought, talking about how amazing they are, and she just loses it. I still don't know to this day, was it an actor? Was that a real metal fan? What's going on with that person?
Yeah, it feels like they were my like, I'm also an obnoxious person who is addicted to trying to figure out where things were shot. And I'm sure somebody would know, but my immediate read on that is like, that feels like it was in front of like the Fonda Theater, and she was like waiting to go into some show, like Van Halen or so, like literally some other show, and they were just like asking her about, Van Halen or whoever and but it's so great, and it just like fleshes the whole thing out in such a great way. And that's what also makes it so wonderful to be like, to watch them, the way the movie kicks off, and then just watching it be like, oh, they are sucking wind. Like they're getting this big push. It's this big, exciting new phase in their career. And then just watching it all sort of like decay and break down makes it so much funnier that it takes itself so seriously.
Yeah. And right out of the gate, you get who David St. Hubbins is.
Yes.
You get who Derek Smalls is. You get who the drummer. It's like, it's so smart in terms of just right out of the gate, you get these individual personalities in this band without ever knowing who they are, just the way they play their instruments and the way they are commanding the stage. It's really amazing. At the video store, we had a bootleg of a 4.5 hour rough edit.
Wow.
Like with the grease pencil marks on it from the flatbed.
Amazing.
It was not funny at all. They really did an amazing job. The work print is basically chronological. So it's chock full of, things that are happening as it goes, like through the movie, of things just falling apart. But it's so much more tragic in the original long form thing. And the fact that they knew what to put in the film, it's edited beautifully.
Yeah, really is.
Because this is a film, when I hear, oh, it's Spinal Tap, I can play that film forward and backward in my head.
Right.
But watching it again, it's so good. It never gets old. The jokes are still relevant and funny. Like, you've heard them a million times and you still laugh at them laughing at Shark Sandwich. There's just a 2-word review, shit sandwich. And they're like, you can't
print that. Yeah, can't print that. Where'd you print that?
Because they're hearing it for the first time. They've never heard these reviews before. It was all improv. And it's just, there's just this joy to it. I can't believe that they had this really dour, kind of tragic, very claustrophobic film that they made, because they were making it and they had the beats in it, but they didn't know what was going to make it or not because it was improv. And boy, it was a slog. It was brutal. So it's kind of amazing what they made.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And it's so, yeah, just the lightest touch. They never linger on a scene too long. Like, it's always the perfect, like, button line of a scene or a moment or whatever. And then also you just forget, like, like you were saying, I think when you play back the movie in your head, it feels like, oh, Nigel, like, who, we're jumping around here in time, but like,
Mhm.
who like very briefly like leaves the band, you remember it as being a much bigger, longer thing. And then when you watched it, because I just rewatched it today, but I also, my wife and I rewatched it about, I would say maybe 6 months ago. And that was the first time I'd seen it in a long time. You remember it as being a much bigger deal. Whereas in terms of screen time, it's like Nigel leaves and then comes back almost immediately.
Yeah.
But it just is like, so you don't, they just give you the slightest gesture of the plot, and they're so, it sort of reminds me of like the secret sauce of Jackass. Like Jackass was never, obviously it is about like guys, hitting each other with increasingly large boxing gloves, but also it's really about the camaraderie. Like it's seeing the friendship, it's seeing the affection that these people have. And you get it like right away from that first scene, where it's much earlier in the movie that I remember it being. But when Marty DeBurgi is interviewing Nigel and David, and they're in like what in my mind, and I can't, again, I'm a annoying like location pedant, but I'm convinced is like an H Salt fish and chips franchise, this weird like little fish and chips place that was in LA in like the 60s and 70s, and I think is still around,
Oh,
and was
amazing.
briefly mentioned on Mad Men. It's like the weirdest place ever. But anyway, he's interviewing them, and they have that little moment about like, what are you doing? What's these? It's my gum. Put it on the table. I forget it on the table, and I'm gonna do an even like, their accents already are sort of like, I would love to hear an actual British person evaluate their accents.
Yes.
I'm going to do an even worse version of their accents in quoting it. But just like those little moments, you can see in the performer's eyes, the sort of affection and like delight they have for each other. And it just carries over as being like the affection that they have that the characters have for each other. That's so the heart of the movie. And it wouldn't work without that.
Yeah, I think that's what made the long cut really hard, is they are in a lot of pain in it.
Yeah.
And they're suffering. Like there's just this drama to it, because you're right. They have the spark in the eye, and they have the camaraderie, and they so early on are kind of finishing each other's sentences and watching out for each other and being like, oh no, you can't do that. Like
right.
when they're talking about, when they're fighting against the record label about what the sleeve is, they're all on the same page. They're like, we're a band. We're all, even though, one of them is fire and one of them's ice and one of them's lukewarm water.
Right.
I mean, they still are equal.
Right.
But you being a location nerd,
yes,
the film was shot almost entirely in LA. So funny. I just am like, oh, they're in Cleveland probably shooting, like it just has a feel like, oh, I'm in the Midwest now. Now I'm
100%. I couldn't agree more. Like and granted I was younger too, but like in the million times that I watched it in sort of the like early like DVD era, when I got introduced to it by my dad, I just, it's exactly the same. You're truly like, you just buy it completely. And then watching it about 6 months ago, now living in New York, having lived in LA for 10 years, when they're driving around in that great scene in the limo at the beginning, it could not be more. First, it's like very downtown LA, which is like, okay, that's fine. Downtown LA plays New York more than it plays downtown LA. Totally buy it. And then there's a point where I think it's around the time that they're having the great conversation about like all of the different, like their managers, like, oh, we got this market and we got that, and we're gonna have this big promo push or whatever. They go by palm trees. Like they really do. They're going by like very clearly like one story LA like surfboard shop and then palm trees, and you're just like, amazing. But you wouldn't. But it works because you're not focused on that, and unless you've seen it a bajillion times, and you're an asshole about where things were filmed, which I am.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, no, I didn't notice it until it's probably my 93rd viewing of the movie, because you're watching them.
Yeah, it's incredible. That's so funny. I did the same thing. I just bought into. They probably did this and just like to play to different audiences and pull different people from Cleveland off the street to see this thing they don't know about, And it's like, what? How could you believe that?
Yeah, no.
It's hard to talk about the film and the beats of the film because I'm assuming everybody who's listening to this has seen it.
Right.
They mostly relied on first takes. And I wanted to ask you about, when you were making your videos, would the first take have a certain magic to it? Did you have a process in terms of how you looked at the different variations of improvisation in the sketch?
That's a great question. I think it sort of depended where. So we made a a lot of the like these sketches where a big part of what made them work was like they were like directed. Like Dan was a director, and then when we made a movie, he directed the movie, and he went on to direct like episodes of Community and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And actually was looking at it with an eye towards like the visual, and also letting us then, if the sketch called for it, potentially have moments where it's like you could like riff and play around and whatever, but then also would have things where it's like very sort of like well thought out shot if it worked for like, let's say we're parodying a genre of film or music video or whatever. It's like he wants it to look the way it looks, to not look like comedy, to look
Sure.
like the thing. So there would be like some pretty heavy duty like camera choreography, and that would kind of mean like, yeah, you want to have your lines down, and especially in those environments you probably aren't playing around as much. But then there would be other times where it'd be very clear like, okay, now is a point where you can improvise, or we're, you know, so it was pretty clear like the differentiation. And I would say, as far as first takes go, like there absolutely is that, or I'll find even for myself as an actor now, when I have to do like self-tape auditions, which since COVID, a lot of auditions, you are just taping yourself at home. And there is something about like the first time, I don't know if it's the same in music, but like the first time you go through something, you might feel like, oh, I kind of got that wrong and I kind of missed that. And then when you go back and watch it, you're like, oh, that had something that I maybe didn't get back until I did it the 18th time or whatever. That can be a little frustrating. And I do think there is something, especially with improv, I would say, where it's like, if we're doing a scene and I improvise a line in it, and this happens a lot in like commercials, then it can sometimes be tough to go back and reintegrate that improvisation into doing another take, because it just might not have the same energy. And also as the viewer, if you've already seen me do that line, it might not be the same because you've already heard it. The joke just isn't as funny to you because you've already seen it. And it lacked that element of surprise it had the first time.
No, in music, it was weird. You know, I grew up playing in the 80s originally, and it was like so scrappy, and you could barely afford to record more than one or two takes. You know, because what were you gonna do with it? You know,
right.
But then in the 90s, when we were all on labels and you were working at like Smart Studios and Butch Vig's place, it's all of a sudden it's like you're just doing take after take after take, because now it's professional.
Right.
And really working with Robert Pollard and Guided by Voices was a reaction again to that, where it's just you did your homework and you just knew you kind of just had to do stuff off the cuff, because he was going to be introducing stuff all the time that you may not be ready for. And he didn't like to do many vocal takes. You know, a lot of them were first take and then some punch-ins. Right. But I think I prefer that. I prefer the looseness of just like, I think we got it, and let's not worry about it too much, because it's like, I don't know, it does lose something, I think. Yeah,
there's a friend of mine who's a much better auditioner than I am, said like, when you're auditioning, the people in the room with you don't necessarily want to see it perfect or exactly what they thought. They just want to feel like something is happening. And there's a difference between somebody doing something that is like, they're doing it the right way, and like they're doing something that feels alive and they're kind of surprising even themselves. And I think there is something to that like first take factor that just feels alive.
Yeah. What do you think of the music in this film? Are you a fan of the songs? Because I kind of love them.
I do too. I was just going to say, like, for whatever reason, this watch through, maybe it's because I was literally, as I'm sure Rob Reiner would love to hear, was watching it on my phone while our daughter was taking a nap with headphones on. For whatever reason, I was really finding myself like appreciating the music, especially like a lot of the sort of little like proggy interludes where it'll sort of be like, suddenly it'll be Nigel, like having this sort of, you know, I will take you there. I will show you how. Where I'm just like, I love this. This is so great. Like I think I wrote down when I was watching it, I think Rock and Roll Creation is probably my favorite song in the movie. Like it does kind of rock, and then it has those like beautiful sort of proggy parts. And it's already been established way earlier in the movie that they had this dumb like rock and roll. You kind of get the sense it's like it's sort of proggy, it's kind of their concept album. It's also maybe them being like, I don't know, we could be a Christian band if you guys wanted to buy it on that. Like they're sort of just trying these different things out. and they establish it way earlier.
We'll go wherever you want us to go.
Yeah. And then you see the song, and the song is clearly designed to accentuate the gag of that number, which is that Harry Shearer can't get out of his pod. Like, they all emerge from these little embryonic pods and he can't get out of his, which is like the stupidest, best simple idea. You know, it's so simple. And the fact that of course he gets out right as the song is over, and they, you know, have the little quiet Nigel, like, I look to the stars, and
he's got his hand to his ear, like he's like trying to like be on pitch. I love that little touch, like, oh, it's my time.
Oh yeah,
gotta work hard.
I didn't even notice that, but I loved all those little touches. You can just, that's when you can tell they just give such a shit about music. And that was clearly put in there to accentuate the part of the bit, which is that like the roadie is like hammering on the side of the thing. So you have this beautiful little melodic part, and then you hear like donk, donk, donk. But the song itself is really good. And you know, and Michael McKean's clearly having the time of his life. Like it's good. It rocks.
It
like,
does.
There's no other way to say it.
One of the major arguments, I guess, they had in the editing of this film was the sound effects of them hitting that hammer and that,
really?
To open
That's
up
so
that
funny.
thing.
Yeah. Right.
They were like, no one in the audience would be able to hear that hammer. It should be quiet. It should just be rock. Rob Reiner said, no, we should be able to hear it. And they got in a big fight about like what should be. And I think they kind of compromised, and, it's a little there. But again, I think it's funny because it is one of the times where it's just full on kind of slapsticky.
Yes.
Like it's just, like it's just, the sound is so dumb of them. Just like you said, this beautiful little harmonic part. Then there's like, but they also, they can play. They were all musicians, and obviously they could write Beatles type stuff and psychedelic pop. And I'm so jealous. My parents have seen Spinal Tap live 3 times.
What?
And they've seen the Mighty Wind film live as well, with like Parker Posey and all the different bands.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, I'm your son.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me you're going to see Spinal? They'll go see it. I didn't even know. I'm like, Spinal Tap,
what?
Where was this? It was because I guess one of the things they have to do, they do not own the rights to the film. They gave that away to make the film.
Right.
But they own the characters,
right?
Which is why I guess every 3 years they have to come out and do an interview,
something, right?
Or make a film or like do a video. And it's so weird. I knew about rights and copyright, but I didn't know actors had to actually go and get dressed up and be the thing to honor this copyright to stay with them. It's really weird.
Yeah, it also feels like the kind of thing that we could find out is like totally apocryphal, that somebody was just like, well, you got to do something every 3 years. Then it's like, no, it's not. Like, that's not a real thing.
But the music, I think the film works because also they wanted to make sure they recorded the songs and they would play them live and use, live vocals when they could, so they could say their, banter and things like that, or in between stuff. They wanted it to feel like it was a show, like when they were on stage, that they could feel the volume, that the audience could react, that it didn't just feel like, all right, everybody places playback. They really wanted to do that. And I think the illusion is really strong in this film, that this is a concert, that they're really playing these songs in their entirety. I don't really see any cracks in it. And all the way from the first song to when they're doing improvisational jazz at the Magic Mountain thing, opening for the puppet show, there's just so much fun and love and spirit in what they're doing. And I think part of the great thing about this film, too, is as much fun as they make fun of it, they're really making fun of just rock and roll. I don't feel like it's just like, oh, metal's stupid. It's like, no, it was dumb when we were wanting to be the Beatles. It was dumb when we were like doing this hippie flower power shit. It's like, it's just, there's so many phonies in this industry. People just, again, now it's time for rock and roll creation. Now it's time for Shark Sandwich. You know, I think that's kind of the beauty of it.
Yeah, and it's just so loving. I think a lot of times when people who are not in the comedy world, when they hear like, oh, you're doing something that is about a comedy thing that is about a given thing, are going like, oh, you're making fun of it. And it's like, it is making fun of it, but it's not in like an aggressive way, if that makes any sense. It's like they're like they're making love to it, for lack of a better word. You know
Yes.
what I mean? Like it's so loving. And I think even the ribbing about like what opportunistic, desperate hypocrites they are is sort of loving, in its way. And it just is going like, yeah, these guys are so dumb. Even the one guy in the band, David, or like, I guess like he and Harry Shearer's character are both like, they really think they're smart. And Harry Shearer's character also is like,
I love
clearly
him.
pretty smart.
He's so intellectual and just holding
Pipe
court
and
with
everything.
his
Yeah,
pipe.
totally. And he almost feels like he's like, well, he's going to retire and write his like biography of the band after he's in the band. It is played to the top of its intelligence. And it's just, I don't know. I'm truly not saying anything here besides like, it's good.
No, I think that's one of the difficulties about talking about this. But, we could go beat by beat through the film and be like, and then this happens to him. And then Bruno Kirby shows up. And then, there's the scene with Billy Crystal. There's just too many great moments to capture it.
Right.
But I did want to tell you that originally Harry Shearer was going to play his character as a Southern rock guy, which I'm really glad he didn't.
Yes.
I think that would have been kind of a weird tell. Like, okay, we're just doing accents. I just think there's a beauty to them going to school together in England and having their skiffle group and being able to sing the songs from the childhood.
I think that might be my favorite scene or one of my favorite scenes in movies. They're just, again, like the sweetness of that. I'm assuming they had written that song in advance. Like it's not totally improvised, but the way that they play it, like they're just remembering it.
It's perfect.
And it's so sweet. Just the little tossed off songs in this movie, like "Give Me Some Money," which they play a couple times, and the skiffle song, "All the Way Home," are so good. Like I think about those songs or absentmindedly sing those songs more frequently than I sing like intentionally non-comedic songs.
I was the same way after watching this, recently. I was singing this in the shower. I'm just singing Big Bottom absentmindedly, and I didn't even know, but it's just like it's got hooks, you know?
Yes. Oh, it really does.
That skiffle song you're right. It's so sweet. And the way that they're acting in it, where they are having to act like they're remembering it in real time and pulling it from their past, it is so masterful.
They're such good actors. I mean, you see why Michael McKean has gone on to be like in Better Call Saul and be an Emmy winning, you completely see it's all there. Him and Christopher Guest are so good in those scenes. Christopher Guest is so heartbreaking. Yeah. The Nigel character, it's like to both have the vacancy where you can be super funny in the sort of like Stonehenge and other, or like These Go to 11, the sort of like guitar scenes, to be as vacant and sort of dumb as he can be in those things, but also so like sweet and so alive, and just the different, he'll just have these little looks in the movie, like when he first sees David's wife show up or girlfriend show up, and is like, he's just like, it's not even a comedic moment. He's just like, clearly is like, oh shit, because he's jealous and he feels like he wants to have like pride of place with David. Or at the very end when he's just watching the band play, and then when he gets signaled to go on, it's like I could cry, I could cry.
Their argument felt alive and real. It is so incredible and so funny still. I've seen it so many times. This might be a film I've seen more than, at least one of the most watched comedies, top three comedies I've ever watched over and over again. Because when I was younger, it just filled the void. It was like there wasn't anything else on VHS that could deliver or you could share with people who weren't familiar with it. It's really a perfect film in a weird way.
It is. Like, I don't have I'm not the type of media consumer really anymore where I have like comfort food movies that I watch all the time. But I was realizing when we watched it like 6 months ago, I turned to my wife and I was like, if I'm ever in a bad mood, if I'm ever whatever, like we can just put this on and it will elevate my mood by like 10 points. And it really did hit me, like you're saying, at the right time in my case, like the DVD era, where it was one of the first DVDs we got. My dad was like an early adopter, always he was like in computers. And so like when it was time for him to get a new like desktop computer at our house, We like went to Fry's Electronics, which was like
Oh
in
yeah,
California and like Arizona, like this
I
giant
remember them.
just palace of like bins of like random components and stuff. It was so cool. Not there anymore. Going there, getting this desktop, and him being like, actually, it has a DVD-ROM drive. Like DVDs were like just this new like format. And he's like, so we could like watch DVDs. So I remember he got like Bullet on DVD. He was like, Bullet's this really cool like movie that I loved. I don't think I've ever seen it all the way through. We get the computer home. He gets it up. He like starts playing Bullet. And he's like, you know what? I bet if I just got one more cable, I could have it play on the TV. So we go back to Fry's. He gets the cable, brings it back, and then like tries the cable for like half an hour and is finally like, you know what, fuck it, get back in the car. And then we go back to Fry's and he just buys the DVD player, which he had been trying to circumvent the entire time. And I think probably on that trip, if not then shortly thereafter, he like we got Spinal Tap on like special edition DVD. And it just was like, I'd never seen it before. He loved Spinal Tap. So he was like, you got to watch this movie. I think you're really going to like it. And so that it's so solidified with all that stuff in my mind. My dad also like loved music and loved stuff like this. So it just is like, it's tapped into so many different parts of my brain. It just like, I love everything about it. And it was something that really did reward that kind of viewing that you can only do when you're like in high school, when you're just like, I'm just going to watch this movie 5 times in a weekend.
Can you think of any other solid music comedies that come to mind?
I do love, and it was another one I almost suggested, but maybe you've done it already, but Pop Star Never Stop, Never Stopping by the Lonely Island did a few years ago.
Yeah.
That movie, that's another one where it truly is like, I haven't seen that many movies multiple times in the past like 5-10 years. Pop Star, we've watched like at least 4 or 5 times, which for us is like a lot.
Yeah.
And it's so great. And it's so like, it's got a similar arc in terms of like, it's this group. And then sort of, in this case, it's like one guy getting too big for his britches and sort of getting elevated again over the other guys in the group. And then, sort of having a moment, coming back down to earth and them reuniting. And it's similarly like, is in love with its characters, plays stupid to the top of its intelligence. And yeah, and the songs are great. Like that's the other thing with Lonely Island, like, almost, I would say more so than this movie, they just explore so much comedically, like within their songs. They clearly just love pop music, as you would see on SNL when they would do music videos and stuff. The songs are so good. They're so funny that I would put that one up there. I'm trying to think of other ones. Can you think of any?
There's 3 that I like. And they're very different. I like Bad News, which is the young ones actors doing a British Motorhead type band. And they did 2 specials. Stephen Frears did it with them, directed it. And it's very in the young ones sensibility. It's a mock documentary, but way more like violent and hyper and abusive, but done really well. And the music is done lovingly too. It's like, it's kind of, some of the songs are awesome. I also really like the Ruddles, of course, and again, musicians. You had members of Bonzo Dog Band and Eric from the Pythons who wrote all their music stuff. It's people who played on Transformer by Lou Reed and Beach Boys stuff, being like, we are going to get inside these Beatles songs and make carbon copies of them that you will start thinking, oh, instead of singing Strawberry Fields, I'm going to be singing Cheese and Onions. Like, it's just a little shift. I think that is super masterful. But one I really like lately was People Just Do Nothing, which was a British show that was created by these people who really loved jungle music and DJ culture and house. They would make these little films, these little comedy films, but they loved it and they knew how to do it and they knew how to DJ and MC. And you can tell there's this love for this thing that's moved on. Like everyone in the show, whenever they say we're Corrupt FM and we do jungle music and house music, they're like, oh, I haven't listened to that since I was like 14. Like they still do that. And they're like, and they get so hurt. Right. And they're just like, yeah, no, it's the music, the only music. Right. And I think that them living in that world and then finding, again, like you said, loving something, it's just, you can tell it's done from a place of obsession and fascination,
Right.
and also living in it. Like, I think these people did want to be musicians, including
Right.
the people in Spinal Tap. They wanted to be in bands.
Yeah, it feels very much so like being you get them being children of the 60s and 70s. It feels like you get that feeling of like they grew up watching the Beatles and watching sort of rock go through all these different ebbs and flows of like prog and different things, and things become this giant dinosaur that then eats the previous thing and then gets killed itself, like,
Yeah.
and just went like, what if we had a band that was, we're kind of making fun of heavy metal. Certainly the songs are sort of like over the top, like sexual, like the ones that are supposed to be like this era of Tap or like their cover or stuff. But it's not the entire, they're not building the whole plane out of making fun of heavy metal.
Right.
It's like, so it's just is about being in a band. It's about having a creative dynamic, and it's about failing. It's just about like sort of like we're just not connecting.
And that's a weird era because in the early 80s, the industry was so huge then. And you still did have bands like Blue Oyster Cult all of a sudden having a hit in the early 80s with I'm Burning for You. And like for 5 years before that, no one had really been paying attention, except for diehard fans. So it was a weird era in that, early MTV time where maybe something could get through the cracks. We don't know. Throw everything. We're going to make a video. We're going to throw money behind it and see what happens, because there was so much guesswork. They couldn't project anything. And also it was an era where you'd see a Judas Priest video followed by a Cyndi Lauper video, followed by like a Madness video, followed by a Michael Jackson video. And you're like, oh, okay. Like it's super jumbled together. And the industry was at that point too. They really didn't know what was going to click.
Yeah, I also too, I love the sort of just, you do get the feeling of like there's just such a weird optimism to everything in this movie. Like every town, and I've never been in a band, so I can't speak to that, but like every town that they go to, every place, like this is gonna be it. Like even when there's sort of the probably the most famous scene in the movie where they can't find the stage, like before they go on, they're bumming already. Like they're definitely in like completely the downslope of this. They're towards the nadir of their like low point. But when they get going and they're going like rock and roll, here we go, whatever, they're going to the stage, like you buy it. Like they're getting charged up again. Like once they get to the stage, they're going to hit it and it's going to be amazing. And it's probably going to be a ton of people out there. Like you feel that optimism every time. Or like when they're, and you also, I think like some of this has got to be, I would imagine, the time, right? Like rock and music in general being more sort of like terrestrial and local and provincial, and like having different territories and different not Marty DeBerge, Artie Fufkin, but like local Polymer Records rep, who's coming in and he's meeting everybody and whatever, like, or like when in that same scene, when the waiter comes in, and I wish I had the actor's name off. I don't have it offhand. It's just a one-line role where he comes in and he's just like, oh my God, thank God, civilization. Where do I put this?
It's so great.
And you get the feeling of like, this is this guy in this town. He's queer. He doesn't really fit in here in like Nebraska or wherever he is. And he's just walking in and being like, you guys are cool. We get it. We all get it together.
I love that too.
So good. I don't think I ever really like processed that on that level until this viewing.
Yeah.
But it's just like that feeling of them like going, on this odyssey of every town is going to be the town, and it's not.
When you're in a band, you definitely, at a certain level, it's like you hope that you're like each one is going to be better than the next. And I've talked to people like even like Peter from REM, and I was like, was there ever places you just couldn't break? And he's like, yeah, there were places that we just like, no matter what, we couldn't, people just didn't come out to see REM, and when you're on tour, you have that one bad show finally, like you're like, oh, it's been going so great, we're selling out everything, and then you get to some place you've never played before and you're like, oh yeah, they don't know who we are, this is real, there's a million bands and they're all doing the same thing. I remember I had a getting lost backstage story.
Stage story,
yes.
Amazing.
So I was in Guided by Voices, and we were and playing a venue in Trenton in New Jersey. And it was packed. And the owner was like, here, we don't want to take you through the audience. Come with me. So he takes us down the stairs. We go through a kitchen. Then we're going around all this stuff. Then we go through where all the food's kept. And it's like these chain link fences with like, rice bags and all this, and refrigerators. And then we go up through this other thing. He unlocks a door, and then we go through a little corridor. It was absurd, right? And then we're like, okay, here it is. And we're like, the door opens, and it's like, okay, we are like facing the audience now, but now we have to walk up these steps, but they can see the door open, right? Like, it's like, all right, we're here. So we get up and we play. And at one point I'm like, Doug's doing a song with Bob, and I'm like, I'm going to go use the bathroom. I go off and I go down, and then I'm down where that chain link fence thing is. And I'm realizing I don't know like which corridor it is. And these doors are shut, right? They're not opening, right? The ones going back to the restaurant. So I'm like, is there another thing? And I'm like, okay, screw it. I got to go back up. And then I turn, and one of the chain link fences rips my shirt open from like shoulder to my stomach, and I'm bleeding, right? So then I find my way out to the back of the place, and I'm standing there watching the band play, and I'm in the back of the audience, and I just turned to someone, tapped him on the shoulder. I'm like, hi, are you enjoying the show? He's like, oh, it's great. And I'm like, can I borrow your sweater? And he's like, sure. And so he gave me this, way too tight sweater. And then I just walk through the audience and get up on stage, and the band's looking at me like, what did you do? Like, why are you dressed like this? Why is there blood coming through this cream colored sweater?
Oh my gosh.
We were known for a drinking band, and I'm sure that didn't help matters, but it was so funny. I was like, that actually happened to me. I couldn't find my way back to stage.
People just assumed you went off stage and got in a broken bottle like bar fight with somebody and got back.
That was a really spooky night. All sorts of things went down. The show only lasted 20 minutes. It was
really?
It was a really spooky thing, and we were just like, we got to get out of here. It was like
bad vibes.
Bad vibes.
Trenton makes, the world takes, but they don't say what they make. They make weird vibes. They make you stop the show. That's what they make.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you were like, hey man, sorry about your sweater. Here's 3 drink tickets.
I tried to find the guy, and I couldn't, and I felt so bad. I was like, I'm just, I've got this thing I'm never gonna wear again. But
he's got a story.
Yeah, it's true.
I feel like you gotta post on the Guided by Voices Reddit, like, hey, by the way, if you ever saw us in Trenton,
you have Venmo, let me get you
exactly
$45 for your Sears sweater or whatever.
No, but there is something too to like, I've never been in a band, certainly never been in a big band, but I wrote for award shows for a lot of years. And there is something about like, I think especially having done it in LA a lot where I was living, like, I'm sure I've been in the exact same back hallways that they filmed the stuff out where it's like, it's at the Forum or it's at, like whatever. And there is something about like, when you do one of these shows and everything's super broken up and they're creating all these new spaces because like everybody needs their dressing room. So like we would have whatever our like writer's room was, and then we would get kicked out because it would be like, okay, Bruno Mars, this is going to be his dressing room like on the night. And it is something where I'll still have anxiety dreams about like, I have this script and I got to get it to the stage to, Cloris Leachman or whatever. And I can't get there. I can't find it because it is just so like, elaborate, and there's different layers of security and like all this different stuff. And it just is like, the movie, I think, adequately captures that as well. And another thing I was realizing watching it this time around, having been in that world, is like that little moment where their manager, Ian, is kind of having a little like, they're like 2 dogs sniffing each other's butts with the manager of Duke Fame, who they run into in a hotel and is clearly having a like Duke Fame's having a hot streak. I've seen that. I'm sure you have too, actually being in rock, like seen 2 managers. Like I remember seeing like Ed Sheeran's manager talking to some other guy who was like, he's a British manager for like an American artist, who was like, oh yeah, mate, what you got? We were just over there. What kind of bus you got? What, like it was really like, you could feel them. Like that thing of, and that like forced positivity of having to be like, oh man, good for you. Yeah, good for you, mate. Oh, that's great. That's whatever. Like you guys, are the only people who understand what the other person does because you have a very unique job and you fucking hate each other. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like but you have to act civil is just like so accurate. And I wonder if, like you were describing, I never thought about this before, but like, I wonder if some of them getting to be Lenny and the Squigtones and go on some of these shows and kind of exist in some of these music spaces, like informed, and probably just being at that point, having been in showbiz for a while in general, like informed some of this very like lived in feeling like showbiz satire.
And I think there's probably more similarities between these, the arts than, like music and comedy and drama and TV or being on stage or writing. It's just like, you're dealing with managers and agents and you're getting your heart broken and elevating your dreams and comparing yourself to other people. I think it's a pretty common thing, but it's just funnier when it's a band. It's just, there's something like, because,
totally.
There's been lots of movies about like, this theater troupe or this comedy troupe or things like that. But there's something about just lying in Spinal Tap's world.
Also, the music too. Like we get to see the music. And so the idea that it's like this music, they're like that their manager is saying to Fran Drescher, who plays Bobby Fleckman, the sort of like the Polytone, like A&R rep or whatever, that he's like, every song on this record is a hit. And you're like, we've heard, like, we know what they're playing. We know that's not true. But that feels like such a classic moment too, that really happens, I feel like, in artistic careers, where she's being like really nice to them and really whatever. And this is great. It's going to be so great. It's going to be so great. And then when Ian is like fighting them on the record cover and whatever, and she's just like, look, what do you want? Money talks and bullshit walks. Like, you guys aren't on an upward trajectory. Your last album wasn't a hit. So there's only so much I can do. You push me and push me and push me to say that. And now I'm saying it. You guys are sucking wind. And it is very just like, also it's just well played. And like you're saying, because we know what the content is, that makes it so much funnier that he's like, you got to like put all this support behind it. If the record company was supporting it, it would be huge. And you just know, like, or it's like that runner on the Best Show that John Worster's characters always say, where it's like, well, our manager pulled a choke job and the label dropped the ball or whatever, where our label pulled 3 or 4 choke jobs. Yeah, totally.
You watch, a movie like Dig, and, Anton from Brian Jonestown is in the record company being like, I'm going to make you a lot of money. And they're like, yes, you are. And we're going to do anything you want. There's that point where everything is beautiful and the sky is the limit and the dream is big and everything is possible. Yeah, it's weird. I had a really weird thing happened to me where in 1990 I was signed to Sub Pop, right? And then a year later, Nevermind broke, and Jonathan and Bruce used to take the Greyhound bus down from Seattle with sleeping bags, sleep on my floor. They had no money, and they're like,
wow.
Like, oh, we really want you to do this thing, and we're like, we love your label, we don't, let's do this. But by the time Nevermind came out, they were just trying to figure out how to clean house with all these bands. They're like, okay, all of a sudden, like, I go visit them. They're like Penthouse Suites, and they're wanting to look at our set lists. Jonathan at one point told me I should think about cutting my hair because long hair was going out. And I'm like, these are the same people that were sleeping on my floor talking about Mission to Burma.
Right.
You would never expect would all of a sudden be like, we're an industry professional.
Right.
And I just think there's something in the industry that, like, people can't help themselves. They get drawn into these archetypes that have just been around forever.
Yeah.
And so I think they capture it beautifully. So at the beginning of the film, everything's rosy. They're like, we're here, tap into America. Everyone's there. Yes. And then not much longer, the same people are like, what do you want me to do? Your album, you can't, no one cares. And it's just like, it's like a week's gone by and they're already like,
oh, completely.
Why are you bothering me? Like, what do you want me to do? And these people a week before were like, you guys are gods.
Oh yeah. No, it's so, oh God, it's great. It's so great.
So are there things that you've noticed this time? Like, you've seen this so many times.
Right.
You've been making notes, it sounds like. And like I have. Like, I'm watching it with a different vantage point.
Right, exactly. This is the hard work of podcasting. We have to take it seriously here. It has to be documented. I mean, like, just all these little touches are it's like I'm hearing lyrics and songs that I've never heard before, even though I've seen it a gajillion times. But like, just little stuff like at the beginning, because Rob Reiner is so funny throughout. I always love his opening, like, his opening little spiel that he gets
So
to the
good.
camera. It's become now my like corny dad thing that I say at the you know what I mean, but just just I say let's boogie a lot. Like I just love when he says
That's
like,
such a good
yeah,
phrase.
enough of my yakking, let's boogie. Also, just you get the feeling like he thinks he's so cool for making a movie about this like not very good, not very cool band. But I was noticing in his little speech at the beginning where he does a little like, it's such a funny bit of choreography that I never noticed before. He crosses his arms and then lets them down immediately, where he has like a little like, and so that's why I whatever, and he like immediately, it's just like those little stuff. I never heard the in Big Bottoms, I never heard Big Game is waiting there inside her tights. Just like Jesus Christ. The I mean, my God.
Yeah.
Blood curdling. I wrote down the line because I just really related to it in this moment. It is such a wonderful, like, when you think about moments in films where people are really at a low point, I almost always think of like when they're at Elvis's grave, and there's that hard cut to Elvis's grave from, I think it's maybe this, it's like, are we going to do Stonehenge tomorrow night? No, we're not going to do bloody Stonehenge or whatever. And then hard cut to Elvis's grave. All right, that might not be it, but whatever it is, it's like they're at a low point, cut to Elvis's grave. And when Harry Shearer's like, well, get some perspective or whatever, and David's like, too much fucking perspective.
Yeah,
I love that line. It's so good. I've noticed this before. This is one of the little dialogue exchanges that always replays in my head, but where it's just like, we were at a blues jazz festival. We're more of a jazz blues festival. Like that is if my sense of humor was in one phrase, it would just be somebody quibbling over whether it was more of a blues jazz festival or jazz blues festival. And then also I didn't get until very recently when he says like the I love so he's like I love Lucy. Yeah, the I love Lucy, whatever. That it's just a dumb pun about I love Lucy. I never got that.
I don't think I got it till now. I just always thought it was so funny. Yeah,
80 times. Yeah, because I think it's clear that they're talking about like
Isle of Wight.
Isle of Wight. Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Especially if you're like a jazz fan, you see so many things that are recorded at like Isle of Wight, whatever, or Newport or different things. This is mic number one. This is mic number one is my go-to like mic check phrase because I'm corny. Let me see whatever. I just wrote down a bunch of times that I thought the songs were good. I'm trying to see whatever. Oh, I love also another one of my favorite moments in the movie. It's the whole scene is great, but that scene where it's the sound check where they're just playing "Give Me Some Money."
Yes,
just their little like. They're just sound checking, playing "Give Me Some Money," like this sort of just like dirty version of the song that they don't play in concert anymore. Is so wonderful. I just I love that. And that whole scene where Janine shows up and is just so well played. It just feels like it's from a real documentary. Everything, when Smell the Glove shows up, it's also just like so much is happening in that scene on like a story level. So great. And then you get the obviously one of the very famous bits of the movie, which is like the All Black album showing up. The actress who plays the like what would now be a TSA agent who says like, do you have any artificial plates or limbs? Shout out to her. She's incredible. Yes. So many incredible little like roles in this movie. I already talked about the guy who says, "Oh, thank God, civilization. Where do I put this?" Oh, I noticed this time around when Artie Fufkin is having his little argument was like, it's like the band's shitting on Artie Fufkin, so now Artie Fufkin's shitting on the record store owner or whatever. He's like, "What are you doing to me?" And he has that thing where he says, sort of the first time I noticed this line where he says, "Forget about personal, what about our relationship?" You know what I mean? Which is almost feels like a Mel Brooks line or something, but it just goes right by because it's thrown away. Like it totally works, and you have to watch it 95 times before you hear it. I love that Nigel's radio unit gets planted so early in the guitar scene, and you kind of don't even think about it because that scene, obviously, you got These Go to 11. You got like, no, don't even look at that. Like, there's so much other stuff, and then that gets planted and then pays off way later with like the Fred Willard Air Force Base.
It's amazing.
Scene. And then finally, I was just noticing also David St. Hubbins. Michael McKean in this movie is beautiful. Like he and Christopher Guest are both like, and Nigel are both like physically beautiful. Like I don't think any comedians have ever looked more perfect and handsome and beautiful in any movie ever. It's very enviable. But there's that scene where Marty is asking them like, do you think, Nigel is left, like, do you see yourself, like, he's kind of saying like, I can't see myself, differentiating him from any of these other like people that would be in the band. And then at the very end of that scene, there's just good filmmaking. Rob Reiner, go figure. Extreme close up of Michael McKean, and he's like, "No, we shan't work together again." It's just like heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's like so good, and they really pick their spots with that stuff. It's not an overly sentimental movie, but it just really, you have these moments where it's like sad. It's is a sad movie, and because the friendship and the relationship really work, that you can hang anything off of that.
Yeah, and I think the fact that they were friends, they all knew each other. Rob Reiner was going to be in the film originally, and then they were like, you don't look good in spandex. It kind of makes it too jokey. And they moved him to like this Marty DiBergi character, which is such a blessing. So good as a
straight man. Yeah.
Such a blessing. And, I guess that they are supposedly in pre-production for Spinal Tap 2, which
I've seen that as well.
Makes me, I don't know. It's a hard one, because they've done a lot of these like live videotapes or revisit things that are fun because they'll do like a different take on Stonehenge, or they'll show different things that happen during Nigel's guitar solos. Like they'll follow the band going out shopping and eating and just killing all this time. I don't know. I mean, it's a little spooky because this is one of the greatest comedies of all time.
Right.
But if they're into it and they're all here, why not?
Right. Absolutely. And I think I don't know, obviously Christopher Guest has stayed at a pretty high level of his sort of evolution of what this movie was. So I think I would be cautiously optimistic about it, also because I think there's enough of a body of movies that are that sort of like comeback, late career, whatever thing. And I imagine these guys are all still big music fans and still like paying attention to how acts that would have been contemporaneous with Spinal Tap have aged, like the Stones and like different things. So
that's a great point.
I will 1,000,000% watch it.
Me too.
And also, I mean, you look at McKean, like talk about being at the top of your game.
Absolutely.
Obviously he's probably better than he's ever been. So cautiously optimistic.
Oh, I'm excited. Thank you so much for this. This has been so much fun.
Thank you, Chris.
I think it's hard to talk about something that's so in our DNA, so iconic. Everybody kind of knows it. But I think the fact that it's exciting to talk about and exciting to revisit all these years later. First time director too. Amazing. Rob Reiner, just like he'd done a television thing before, but to make this thing have the heart of a real documentary and be so funny and still resonate and be timeless. And again, like you said, all the little characters who sprinkle in, Artie Fufkin, the person coming in, the taxi driver, Duke Fame, all these things are so perfect. They just don't overstay their welcome and they stick with you. So it is hard to pick your favorite moment, your favorite song, because you just start going like, oh, and that leads into this, and that leads into this, and then and then you're at the credit sequence.
Yeah, and also just like mockumentary wise, it's so easy to think of like, oh, and I don't know the history well enough, so I don't know if there were examples of like big mockumentaries before this, but like it kind of feels like this is really the watershed for like this kind of being invented, and somebody, obviously I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong, but like it's so easy to take that for granted because it's such a form now. I love it. I love mockumentaries. I love playing in that world. And when you look like documentary now and things like that, they're so well done and just like have cranked out so many different types of documentary parody. But it's so easy to take for granted. But what Rob Reiner did with this is amazing. He did kind of create a new form of comedy with this, a comedy film. And it rules.
It does indeed. Well, at the end of every interview, I ask the same question, but I tailor it to what we're talking about. I'm sorry, it's a little on the nose here, with 1 being the lowest and 11 being the highest. What volume setting would you give this film?
I would give this film 11, which is not just 10, but make 10 the highest and make that one. It goes to 11, damn it. But don't look at it. Don't point. No, don't point.
That is right. That's the number I have written here. It is 11 is the right answer. That's amazing. Congratulations. You're doing great.
Thank you.
This was brilliant. Thank you so much, DC. It was so great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I really appreciate it. Likewise.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday, so be sure to search for the show on your favorite podcast app and subscribe to the show. And if you've enjoyed this, it would mean a lot to me if you would rate and review it as well. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie, and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!